An eye on Cleethorpes because we think that the Prime Minister is going to be headed there. While we wait for that to begin, let's speak to my two guests who have joined me here at Westminster this afternoon. Pawel, Swidlicki, who is from Open Europe, and the journalist and author Matthew Goodwin. Welcome, gentlemen, to both of you. Pawel, can I start with you, because it's so interesting listening, of course, to the reaction on continental Europe, because effectively, as much as we can summarise, people saying, including Jean-Claude Juncker, of course, look, we want this divorce to be cracked on with. We want you to get on with it. While here at Westminster, the mood is, we don't have a new Prime Minister till October, we're taking our time. There's already that tension there.
Indeed there is, but I would also say that the response from Europe has not been uniform. I think while Jean-Claude Juncker, the President of the European Commission, does indeed certainly want to crack on with the exit negotiations, I think the tone coming from some national capitals and also from Donald Tusk, the President of the European Council, has been a bit more cautious. I think ultimately, I think they think that this is a very volatile situation, and that it's probably good for everyone to take a deep breath before proceeding ahead.
Lord Hill, Britain's Commissioner to the EU, standing down. No surprise there?
Well, as long as the UK remains a member state, and it could well remain a member state for over 2 years, it will still need a European Commissioner. It will still need to have members of the European Parliament. So in that sense, maybe he stood down for personal reasons, because, as I said, for as long as the UK remains a member state, it will need to be represented within the European Commission. So someone will now have to be found to replace him.
Matthew Goodwin, I should say, from Kent University as well, wearing your many hats. I mean, it's so interesting just talking to the London bureau chief of the Washington Post, talking about the absolute shock in the United States, just the sense in America that this was not going to be the result, and that has been echoed in various quarters. Your thought about relations now, international relations, and how Britain moves forward and negotiates everything it has to now with the rest of Europe.
Well, just on that point about shock, there's also a lot of shock in London about this result. A lot of friends saying, I can't believe that we voted for Brexit. I do think it's important to remember that this has been a long time coming. If you look at British politics over the last 20 to 30 years, we know that there have been a lot of voters angry over immigration, distrustful of elites in Westminster, very Eurosceptic. We've seen the rise of UKIP. We've seen those kinds of populist parties breaking into areas like Wales, which were majority Brexit. So this should not be as much of a surprise as some people are claiming that it is. Now, internationally, what's interesting for me this morning and yesterday is watching the number of parties in Europe now on the right coming out and saying, well, we want a referendum as well. The French, the Swedes, the Dutch, and of course in Italy last week, local elections, a story that many people missed. The Five Star Movement, which wants its own referendum on the euro, did very well. And that, I think, is where we're now going to head. Referendum democracy. We're going to be talking a lot about it, I think.
I mean, that's really interesting. And
I think that is then very interesting to see how that then interacts with the Brexit negotiations, because, as Matthew says, there is this populist backlash against European elites. It takes different forms in different European member states, but therefore the other European in a bit of a bind, because they don't want to cut their nose off to spite their face. They don't want to punish the UK for voting to leave, but they also can't make the leaving to be seen as too attractive, because that will then further encourage precisely those kinds of political forces. So we are really in a bit of a dilemma here. I
mean, yeah, Matthew, you're nodding to that. I mean, yeah, you look across Europe and you see a tumbling of dominoes.
Everybody's facing a really big challenge now, and in particular, Social Democrats are facing a big challenge, because if you look at the results here in Britain, very working class, the Brexit vote, very economically disaffected, very left behind, voters who don't feel like globalisation has been working out, voters who were the first to get hit by the recession and never really recovered. And Social Democrats, including the Labour Party now, have a really big problem. Their coalition is cut straight down the middle. Urban, affluent, highly educated Londoners versus working class, struggling, left behind voters. That's not a viable coalition for a major mainstream party. So the Labour Party, like Social Democrats elsewhere in Europe, big trouble.
well, in fact, I was chatting about that yesterday with Peter Hitchens from the Mail on Sunday, who said it was a disaster for both Labour and the Conservatives, that it proved, because both, exactly as you've described, their electorates are just split. It's like they've got two different groups of people, and that one party cannot satisfy both those demands.
I would argue that the Conservative Party are better placed in terms of being more in touch with the national mood. They've got a tradition of Euroscepticism. They could recast themselves more within that tradition now. The Labour Party, however, it has a more profound disconnect with the electorate, because virtually all of its members of Parliament, with the exception of a few, and most of Labour senior figures, are pro-EU and pro-free movement, and their voters. I mean, what struck me, Merthyr Tydfil, home of the Industrial Revolution in South Wales, Hartlepool, West Yorkshire, Lancashire, real Labour heartlands turning out in large numbers for Brexit. 51-52, 65% plus.
Yes. So interesting. So much more we could talk about. We will see you again, I'm sure. Thank you so much for joining us. Matthew Goodwin, thank you. And Pawel Swidlicki from Open Europe, thanks very much for your input this afternoon. Good to have you with us. Let's return to the rest of Europe. I think we're going to Brussels.